Do you think it is possible to stop fighting with the problems that keep coming up over and over again? Is it really possible not to feel frustrated, disappointed, victimized, or even crushed by those problems? I have been sitting with these questions for a while. I still don't have all the answers, but as I share my story, you may be able to find your own way of quitting that fight. Because at some point, we have to give up that fight. Constantly fighting with life drains us. And when we are exhausted, there is no way we can find a solution or improve a situation. As I have been learning to stop fighting with life, I realized that small, everyday, annoying things like the construction noise, the traffic, the bad driver, they all need our constant awareness. We need to be constantly aware, not to resist them, not to fight with them, and find our way through them. Like I explained in another video named How to Stop Fighting with Life. But they are easier to make peace with. They are like little practices, tiny exercises that build up our acceptance muscles. But bigger chronic problems, they are different story, or at least they are for me. Maybe because they have been around for a while and we haven't been able to solve those problems. They are heavier and they are not as easy to make peace with. Especially if it is something like mine, which is a health issue. So I have been reflecting on this for a while, and one day I got this question: who are you without that problem? I couldn't understand the question at first. I had heard from great teachers like Eckhart Tolle that many make an identity out of the problem, and that's why they get stuck in that problem. But I never really understood that. But when that question came to me, I suddenly realized that 90% of my thoughts were about that problem. And as a result, 90% of my efforts were going into trying to solve that problem. And then the next question came: what would you do if you didn't have that problem? Well, how would you live if that problem wasn't there? And I felt empty inside. Because suddenly I realized that I wouldn't have much to think about if I didn't have that problem. I wouldn't know how to live without that problem. Because my whole life had been centered around that problem, trying so hard to solve that problem. No wonder I had made a sense of self out of that problem. Because I could only see myself through the lens of that problem. It has influenced all my thoughts, my emotions, my personality, my day-to-day life. So I didn't want to let go of that problem because it kind of meant that I had to let go of myself. I didn't want to let go of that problem because I didn't want to feel this emptiness. And here I was feeling so empty and out of place. And all of that, of course, happened unconsciously. I wasn't aware that I was doing that to myself. So that day, the day that those questions came to me, was difficult. But it shifted something. I still had the problem, but I didn't feel like I was defined by that problem anymore. I didn't feel like even I was the fixer of that problem. I stopped putting all my energy into solving that problem. I stopped looking at myself all the time through the lens of that problem. I still don't like being in that situation, but I understood that I can live a good life despite that problem. And if that problem has been here for a while, no matter for how long, it doesn't mean that it's going to be here forever. It's just the way our mind works. It looks at what has been happening and it builds a pattern trying to predict what's going to happen in future to protect us. But in reality, it just keeps us stuck in that story, in that problem, in what happened. So if your problem has been not having enough money, for example, it doesn't mean that you are going to be broke forever. It just means that right now things are hard. You may not be able to pay your rent easily, or you may not be able to eat at a fancy restaurant. But it doesn't mean that it's going to last forever, no matter how long it has been there in your life. And it doesn't mean that you have to define yourself based on that problem. Looking at yourself as a person that always has money problems, is always broke. Or even you don't have to look at yourself as the fixer of that problem, because you are not. And you don't have to solve that problem all at once. You can deal with pieces of that problem as they come up and let the change happen on its own. And you don't have to be mean to yourself for not having been able to solve that problem yet. You didn't come to this world to solve the problems. You came to create, to experience, and out of all that, find out who you really are.